and I want to give you a different kind of talk. Vita wanted me to talk about myself. I don't like to talk about myself. What I like to do is to teach chemistry, but I also like to teach other things. And I thought a good way into this art and science interface will be through taking a question which at first sight seems absurd, and that is there such a thing as abstract chemistry? So now, what do I mean by abstract? So I think let's see, let me see how to go down here. Let's see what's not, something's not working here. So I'll hold on a moment, please, while
I can see very well, Robert.
I know that. My controls on my thing are not working, so I have to go through the mouse. Okay, so what I want to talk about is an analog in a science to abstraction in art. So that is the abstract that I mean, not the many other meanings of that English word. And at left, you see a work of art. It happens to be by a sculptor at Cornell University, Roberto Bertoia, and it is an abstract piece. It is not representational in any sense. Though you could make out a structure or a house or a tree house or something out of it, but it's not intended to be that. At right is something rather symmetrical, a molecule made by Fraser Stoddard. And in there, and I will later show you how I fit that into the theme of abstraction. Now, as things which are patently identifiable as abstract art, it's very interesting that we can today say whether a piece is abstract immediately. We sense it. That was not necessarily true 200 years ago. But the work at left, which was made by a great American sculptor who happened to be born in what is now Latvia, but was then Russia, the Russian Empire. Mark Rothko, Rothkovich was his name when he was born, is a great work of abstract art, and we'll come back to some of his work and its emotional impact. At right is a painting from actually older than Mark Rothko, one of the pioneers of abstraction, a Swedish painter, Hilma af Klint, who was not very well recognized and certainly is not as well known as Mark Rothko. She lived in another time, but her things are very interesting in a context of other things that you recognize as abstraction. Abstraction was there in art before there were abstract painters. You know, that's another story, like there were chemists before there was chemistry. And I have another whole talk on that. But here are two things. Jomon pottery from 3,000 to 5,000 years ago in Japan. And at right, these are actually textiles from what are called Andean cultures, the Wari culture. This one is from probably around 400 of our era. We have to be very careful about calling something abstract or decorative and not representational in the context of older art, because what may be abstract to us may have had significant layers of meaning to the people who made these things. So, but they certainly look like what we today consider abstraction. And these are, as you see from the Jomon piece, very, very old. But the real marker of abstraction in a modern sense, in a sense that it's known in art in at least the West, is the exhibition by Kazimierz Malevich in 1915 in Moscow. And this was the age of photography, so we actually have a photograph of the exhibition, and that's what you see here. And you see here the squares, the black squares that became a hallmark of Malevich, and which he used to introduce what he called the suprematist exhibition. Of course, he wrote about it, and it's very interesting to read what he wrote about it. The book, which you see at bottom, a pamphlet that was published in 1916, written, of course, with the old orthography. Here is a translation, actually. It sounds better in a Russian, so but I'll first read it in English for those. I put it in Russian the other way for people who can read it. If you read about this, he's very polemical, but that's in the nature of artists and schools of artists, that they're going to express themselves in ways which are intolerant of anything else. And so he says, and only a cowardly consciousness and meager creative powers in the artists are deceived by this fraud and base their art on the forms of nature, afraid of losing the foundation on which the savage and the academy have based their art. It sounds better in Russian, so you can read it about here. И только трусливое сознание скудность творческих сил, and you can read on there better than I can, and you will see he is very, very nasty here in what he has to say about to reproduce beloved objects in little corners of nature is just like a thief being enraptured by his legs in irons. He's really against naturalistic representation. But what is he really against in 1915? Oh, he's not the only one. Here is Igor Stravinsky writing about music. For at the root of all musical creation, he actually wrote this in English, one discovers an appetite that is not an appetite for the fruits of the earth. He didn't like little musical pieces that tried to imitate a walk in a meadow or something like that, which were programmatic in any sense. So what was Malevich against? This is what he was against. Now, this is, of course, it's not that Levitan's representations, landscape of Russia, were photographic. They were in a sense, but they weren't. They were very differently composed with a mood and a meditation in mind. This particular painting, which all of you who are from Russia will know from their childhood on, was painted 40 years before Malevich wrote his piece. So he was very much reacting to the prevalent aesthetic of naturalism, of naturalistic representation. So now to turn to science, chemistry in particular. So what can chemistry be against? Well, let's take the simple one. If abstraction in art a la Malevich is against naturalistic representation, things of nature, of people, of landscapes, well, then obviously the people in chemistry, when they're making molecules, are going to make unnatural molecules. But you're going to tell me they're all unnatural that they make. Well, that's not, it's still not the same as trying to duplicate in a lab, never duplicate, but to make in another way a natural molecule. Here is the single biochemical molecule that we know more about than any other biochemical molecule. It occupies 2 chapters in your biochemistry textbook. This is hemoglobin, the carrier of oxygen in red blood cells. There are 4 subunits here. These are schematically, you don't see the atoms except in the little green platelets on your screen. You see these helices, those are simplifications. There's another story going on here about representation in art and in science, but it's at the center of those green platelets that there is an iron atom, and that carries the oxygen it takes up the oxygen in our respiration. So chemistry would be against making perhaps the natural molecule, if it were in our power, and that we can today, but we could not 50 years ago, make hemoglobin synthetically, not that we'd want to. I'll show you other molecules that we want to make, but if we wanted to do it, that would be trying to make a natural molecule, would be called, actually in chemistry, there's a whole field called natural products chemistry. But in fact, this what would be the analog of making something synthetic, but rather that doesn't at all look natural, is something very symmetrical. Something very interesting in that, which we'll talk about later. The simple things in our mind are symmetrical. The real world is unsymmetrical, or mostly unsymmetrical, partially symmetrical. And what's in our minds and what we like is the symmetrical. And the unsymmetrical has trouble getting into our minds. So there's something going on interesting about human psychology in here, and about simplicity and complexity. But these molecules shaped like a tetrahedron, a cube, a dodecahedron, they're beautifully simple, simply beautiful, and devilishly hard to make. And none of these are natural, except the last one, that molecule of Buckmann's fullerene, which should be on a flag of Brazil, is actually probably occurs in nature as well. The other ones don't, at least they haven't been found so far, but they were all made in the last 50 years and in interesting ways. Now, so what would be another, that's making symmetrical molecules. That's in some ways giving into simplicity. I'm interested in more interesting things. Here is, look at the top here. At the top left, there is a chemical formula of an amino acid. Some of you can see my cursor. Let's see if I can get a pointer up here. I can't quite do it, so I'm going to skip that. If you look where it says alpha amino acid at the top left, that's what our proteins are made out of. It has an amino group, that's the part of its name, and the acid group is the COOH. And then there is a CH2, and then one hydrogen of that CH2 is replaced by any of 19 other possibilities to create a toolkit of molecules. And then this thing is polymerized to make these helices that you see in these various representations. These are called alpha amino acids. Those are the natural ones. They're the components of life as we have it. So someone gets it in their head to make a beta amino acid. So what's a beta amino acid? It's got, instead of that CH2 in the middle, it's still an amino acid. It's got an amino group and an acid group. But in the middle, it's got 2 carbons and 4 hydrogens instead of 1 carbon and 2 hydrogens. It's now got 4 hydrogens that can be replaced by something else. And you can fool the body to a certain extent into taking these up and building them into proteins, or you can use these directly where parts bind amino acids. You can fool them into binding the beta amino acid, but you can see what's going on in people's heads. We're going to kill cancer cells by attaching to the beta amino acid something that will kill the cancer cell once it's absorbed. Anyway, one has made something unnatural, and the story that I've sketched about killing cells is actually part of the justification for making these unnatural things. Now, here's a combination of the two enterprises done by my friend Ned Seaman at NYU. Each of the spheres in this, whatever color they are, is one of the bases of a nucleic acid of a DNA molecule, so that each stretch of one edge of this cube, can you see the cube that's there? Each edge of that cube is made out of a piece of DNA. And Ned Seaman has directed the linking up of these stretches of a most natural molecule into something that no natural DNA would dream of doing. Now that is really transgressive. That's using the natural to do something which it doesn't want to do. But it's, how different is that from training a plant to grow on a trellis in your garden? That's also training something natural and making it do something it doesn't want to do of itself. I participated in this game. Carbon likes to be tetrahedral, to have its 4 bonds going off toward the corners of a tetrahedron, as drawn in that little tetrahedron at lower left. Then in 1970, I wrote a paper with actually a friend who's very much alive, Charlie Wilcox, and we wrote a paper about what we need to do in order to convince carbon to go square planar, which is what it is at lower right. It doesn't want to do it, but maybe if you substitute instead of the hydrogen something else, you can induce it to go square planar. And people have been trying for the 50 years that have happened since then to do this. There is now a veritable industry of trying to make square planar carbon atoms. It's not easy, but this is a game. Now let's go back to our foil, that's Malevich, because he expresses himself so directly that it's very easy to find things in him. One of the things he says, so, okay, he's against nature, but Malevich is not stupid. It's pretty restraining to be only against something, to define yourself by negativity. I am against painting faces and painting birch forests. That's a very boring way. So what he says, to go beyond that, is our world of art has become new, non-objective, pure. Okay, when I see the word pure, I put a sign danger next to it, because, and I put it in German here for a reason, because whenever somebody makes a claim to purity, what's following after is that this is a symbol for a purity of a people or a culture. And this is what leads claims to purity to not allowing yourself to mix. And it doesn't matter whether it's whites and blacks or whether it's Germans and Jews. Claims to purity are always for the purpose of denying something. And so this is danger. Even though they're claims to be pure, they're not there. But I'm going to interpret Malevich charitably, as you'll see. I'm going to reinterpret the pure in terms of something where you concentrate on the essence of something rather than on its ability to mix with other things. So I'll put that in terms of art and you'll see what I mean. Here, what became very quickly a creative theme for abstraction in art was that art began to concentrate, abstract art began to concentrate on formal issues. So what are formal issues? Formal issues are things like color, line, being inside or outside, being near the edge or being near the center, being transparent or being opaque. Those things are the formal elements of artistic expression. And people in art school learn how to do these things and how to convey them. Here is an example in the work of someone, an abstract artist of mid-20th century America, Ed Reinhardt, whom I like. And you can see in these images that he is concentrating on color and shape and how they go with each other. That's the particular purity that he's seeking. He doesn't want us to be distracted by a face in this. But then there are other artists who will use these and put on top of it representational things. You can think of the pointillists who would make impressionistic art with lots of quite visible points of color. Or you can think of Chuck Close, I don't have a picture here, who makes from little patches of film or patches of color, puts together a face almost in pixel-like concentration. So you can see the face. But here, the concentration is clearly on the color. So what's the analog in science? So I have to tell you a story to begin with. I'm going to tell you the story leads up to a concentration in chemistry on a formal issue. But before I get to that, I have to tell you a little bit more about chemistry. Here is a molecule that's useful. It's called Taxol. It's paclitaxel. It's an element of a number of chemotherapy regimes. It's a complicated molecule. You can see from that chemical structure. It was first isolated about 50 years ago from the bark of a yew tree. A yew tree is a slow-growing semi-tropical tree that you see at lower left here. And that the bark of that tree provided about 3 doses. It proved to kill tumors. But the bark of a tree, which took 300 years to grow, provided 3 doses of that anti-cancer drug. There is no way you could make a useful anti-cancer drug from something, from growing a tree for 300 years and then killing it. It just doesn't work that way. So there had to be found a chemical way to synthesize Taxol, either from scratch or from some pieces of it, or from perhaps a plant material that was close to it. And actually people then set off on a search once they found that this material was useful on how to synthesize in a laboratory Taxol. So here is an example of synthesizing a natural product, but doing it for the purpose of reproducing it so that it would be cheaper. But there is also another purpose. When you make this from pieces, you can vary the pieces a little. And the usual problem with drugs when they're found as natural products is they are not as potent as they could be, and they are more toxic than they should be. So what you want to do by playing with this molecule is to make it more potent but less toxic. And that's what the synthesis allows. So synthesis, how do chemists make molecules? They make them the way children make things. That's what you see at left. This is a mechano set from my childhood. We had these, they were called erector sets in America and in Canada. We put together from pieces. we put complexity together from simple pieces, but we also do it in a rather different way. What's going on in that flask where that blue liquid in front of the chemist is there are billions and billions of molecules that are jumping around and colliding and doing what we hope what the chemist wants them to do, hands off. It's not a hands-on building, but one builds that complexity. And just to show you here from a scientific paper is an interesting thing. It's a plan of the synthesis of Taxol. It's the plan that the person, Sam Danishevsky, who worked for a long time, he's now retired at Columbia and the Cancer Institute, Sloan Kettering in New York. The Taxol molecules at upper left in all its beautiful complexity. And then you see arrows where it's getting progressively simplified. That's not what him taking it apart. It's a mental taking apart of the structure, what's called in the trade retrosynthetic analysis. That's just a fancy word. It means I'm planning how to put you together. And eventually all the arrows will be reversed. And that's the way the person plans to put it together. And you can be sure that the molecule is not going to cooperate. And there are going to be hurdles and barriers, and people will find ways to overcome them. This is an adventure story, but I show you here because you can see how the simplicity at the lower left progresses through stages to the complexity of the molecule of Taxol. There's something else here. This is not the first synthesis of Taxol. This is the third synthesis of Taxol. In Wikipedia, there are 7 syntheses of Taxol. It tells you something, that the 7th way to do the same end that was accomplished 6 times before is worth an entry in Wikipedia. It's telling you something about the complexity of the task that's involved, and that indirectly it's telling you, it's people watch these things, they look for different ways of making them. Now, when you make this Taxol, now I think I've convinced you that you make it by putting together pieces. You see in this formula for Taxol, you see vertices, and there's no atoms at the vertices. You see some O's and some H's, but you don't see any atoms at the vertices. But what's sitting at the vertices are carbon atoms. And they are so common that they would clutter the picture, so they're omitted from the picture. So the carbon atoms, which are the vertices, in assembling these, the carbon atoms are brought together in a flask through collisions of molecules. And so if you want to make a ring of 6 atoms, you take a chain of 4 carbon atoms and you bring together 2 to that, and you make a ring of 6 by forming 2 bonds. What this is, it's a carbon-carbon bond forming reaction. And these molecules are assembled from simpler pieces in a Lego mechano fashion, but happening in a flask, hands off. In a fascinating way, they're brought together, but there has to be different conditions under which they come together. What I mean is that the groups influence each other. And what you see on a screen are O's and carbon double bond O. You see oxygens, you see OH, they're called alcohol groups. Each of these influences the environment. So one cannot do this. There isn't one carbon-carbon bond forming reaction. In fact, I copied from Wikipedia. I looked in Wikipedia for how many I put in the search term, carbon-carbon bond-forming reactions. And I got 102 pages in Wikipedia. I know those pages are of no interest to you, but I tell you, because they are in Wikipedia, they're of interest to somebody. So that what you see here, and you notice that they're associated with names, the names of the people who did that. This is an old tradition in chemistry, going from Russian sources like the Favorsky reaction. Favorsky was the uncle of a well-known chemist, of a well-known artist. You see other reactions. By now you've forgotten why I've shown you this. I've shown you this to show you that chemists obsessed with making carbon-carbon bonds are exploring a single formal element of chemistry, which is how to form bonds. And they're exploring all the different ways to make it. It's, to me, a little bit analogous. The chemist wouldn't like this if I said it, but to me, it's analogous to Ad Reinhardt making his paintings. What's another element of abstract art? One of the elements of abstract art in the last 100 years is chance. And I don't even have to give you the name of this guy who is throwing paint on a canvas, because his name has become as iconic as Picasso's, and this is Jackson Pollock. Those paintings aren't quite as random as they look, but they stand for chance giving you an artistic element. So how is chance? It's not only there. Let's go to something else. Here is, I just want to get away from Jackson Pollock and our thinking about chance. Here is something which I love, which are Japanese ceramics. This is Jun Isazaki, and this is a Bizen piece. That's just a certain type of clay and firing. And this ceramic object was shaped and then put into a kiln, and other objects and natural matter like leaves or sticks were put against it. And that you see the area yellow or reddish orange there is the result which was not planned. What was planned was to get some design and disorder, but it was not planned to get that design and disorder. And I am sure that a number of these were rejected by the ceramic potter when they came out of the oven. But here is the chance event being given its opportunity to influence an artistic creation. So there is a branch of chemistry called combinatorial chemistry. Usually one designs drugs by having, today, when one knows the structure of the protein, that's what's labeled there as the target, some sort of shape that is at the active site of some biological molecule in a bacterium that you want to defeat in some way. So what you want is to find a molecule which fits into that cavity. And people try to design that molecule, knowing what is the shape of the cavity. But one particular branch of chemistry called combinatorial chemistry, instead of trying to design a single molecule that fits into the hole or the cavity in the target molecule, instead what they do is they throw in lots of little puzzle pieces, which is what you see at left. Smaller molecules of various shapes, but primed to react with each other. And then they make from this, they allow them to react, and they allow the target to choose what binds with it. But once it's bound, they also need a way of detecting that it's bound, and they have that. So what they do is they form rather amusing. So one of the things that scientists do, aside from sanitize the procedures by which they reach their conclusions and overemphasize the mathematical in what they do, one of the things they are prone to do is to invent words to give what they do a fancier sounding name than what it really is. So the mixing up of the molecules in order to make them assemble into pieces that go into the target is called making a dynamic combinatorial library. They think this will sell better on a grant proposal. And maybe it does. I don't think anyone is bothered by and no, people know what the simple idea there is. Whoops, I want to skip that. I was going to talk a little about playing games, but that was left over. I want to get, because I've talked too long, a little bit to the last part, which is an interesting aspect of chemistry, seeing abstract features in chemistries and a feature of abstract art too. So I have shown you some common features of these two activities, which look very different from each other, but in which I see a certain resemblance. Now, both of these activities, abstract art and chemistry, have got a problem. The problem is that they are emotionally cool. It's a problem of science in general. And it's a problem of abstract art, or so it seems. It's very hard to be emotionally cool toward a portrait of a mother and child, a Madonna and child, or to a portrait of two old people. But when you look at Frank Stella, or you look at this more up art piece by Julian Stanchek, who is a Polish-American artist who recently died, who lived in Detroit all his life. They are colorful for sure, but they lack the immediate human contact and the communication of emotion, which is there in art for sure. Now, and I think to a certain extent, I think I'm not maligning the beautiful molecules, whether it is a nitrogen atom caught inside a soccer ball molecule or the Taxol, when I say that these molecules are emotionally, have got a little bit of a problem. Now, I can repair that. I could repair it in a number of ways. I could repair it by telling you the creation story of these molecules. I could tell you a little of the cognitive background, what makes it interesting to find a single atom inside the sphere, and how the heck did people put it in? And how the heck did they know that it was in when the molecule is so small? I could tell you stories of cancer survival, and maybe you know some stories like that in your literature, which are due to treatment with Taxol. These are human interest stories, and the drug cannot but partake of the emotional story that comes around it. But I do want to talk a little bit more about this. And let me take Rothko here. And let's take abstract art first. This is the Rothko Chapel in Houston. The chapel, it's called a chapel. And it is on the walls of this modern structure are a set in 2 rooms are a set of Rothko paintings, but you will see here that they are not those warm orange on red that I showed you earlier in a Rothko, but these are as somber Rothko paintings, as close to Malevich's squares as you can make, but they are in subtle, differentiated colors. And the color scheme in this photograph is not bad overall. There is a kind of purple to indigo coloration in these. And I have been in that chapel and I have watched people in that chapel. In part, you're predisposed to it because it's called a chapel. Incidentally, there is no religious symbol anywhere in sight. Anything. There is no religious symbol here. I have seen people in this chapel and I have seen them cry. There is something about the act of contemplation, of intense concentration on this artistic object, outside of yourself, but reflecting something in yourself, which makes people introspective, forms an emotional bond, and overcomes the coolness with no difficulty at all. I think this is part of what is going on in abstract art, and it's also there in chemistry. The more I tell you about the intellectual power that went into that 3rd synthesis of Taxol, and why a 7th synthesis of Taxol was a publishable entity, the more you will understand some of the emotional impact of these things. Here is a quote by Ad Reinhardt. Before I gave you a quote by Malevich. This is another quote by an apostle of abstraction. And he says, in some text he wrote, some claim to represent nature, hell on earth, sick society, inner turmoil, wild beasts and things as they are. May not one side of me speak up for the side of the angels? I think he's right. And I brought here a poem by a Polish American writer, Czesław Miłosz, about angels, who says, they say somebody has invented you, but to me, this does not sound convincing, for people invented themselves as well. The voice, no doubt it is a valid proof, as it can belong only to radiant creatures, weightless and winged after all. Why not? Girdled with the lightning. I have heard that voice many a time when asleep, and what is strange, I understood more or less an order or an appeal in an unearthly tongue. Soon it is day, another one. Do what you can. Zaraz dzień, jeszcze jeden. Zrób co możesz. I have somewhere else another poem. I cannot pass up the opportunity to give you a poem. And this is another angel. And some of you also recognize what movie that still is from at the bottom. But this is Rainer Maria Rilke. Jeder Engel ist schrecklich und dennoch wie mir ansing ich euch fast tödliche Vögel der Seele wissend euch. Every angel is terrifying, and yet alas, I invoke you, almost deadly birds of the soul, knowing about you. This is the voice of the angel this is a different kind of angel from that little figure on birthday cards. I want to finish the story by telling you another story. And this is about science and art. As you can see, I value the art highly, and I have one mission is to bring the two together and to both bring out the art in the chemistry, which I hope I've done in part in that little Taxol story, but also to bring the art to chemists. This is a story about E.O. Wilson, who is the greatest naturalist we have. And he was once asked in an interview, what would happen if we meet those sentient beings in an alien civilization on the exoplanets? What would they want to, what would you want to talk to them about? What would they find interesting in us? And he said, not our science. If they got here, we are juveniles to them. They would like to know about our culture. We've accumulated this immense mass of imagination and creativity in the creative arts. They would like to know what this is. This is our heritage, what makes us human. I think that it is the art and the science that will make that civilization stop here. It is really a wonderful object of creation. Perhaps those alien visitors will stop here for a while. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Many, many thanks, Roald. Dear friends, you have an option to unmute yourself. I think it was wonderful. Roald, you can just stop sharing so we will see your face.
I will. I will do that.
Unless you want to share.
Done.
I think it's super interesting and it's very unusual. By the way, I am ignorant. I didn't recognize the movie, the one that was beside the Rilke's poem.
Ah, yes, that was Wim Wenders. What is the movie called in English? Let's see. Angels of Desire. So Wings of Desire. Wings of
Angel over Berlin.
Angels over Berlin. Wings of Desire in English.
I have it. I can share it with you.
It's a wonderful movie.
That's very cool.
It has, it has Columbo in it. How can it be bad?
Yeah. So questions, please.
Please, please.
Well.
Я подумаю.
Mr. Hoffmann, do you share opinion of Wilson about science and the art, that for Alliance, our art is the only thing of interest, the only point of interest, but not our science. Maybe
Yes.
our methodology, maybe our science methods are might be not less interesting for them.
Yes. So I have asked myself that question in another sense, and that I've asked myself, what question would I want to ask those people who come from another civilization? What I would like to know is how they represent Mendeleev's table, because it's not going to look like our table, but there is an underlying reality about the elements and their similarities. So they're going to represent. We know that evolution works so that there are with the same building blocks, there is this immense differentiation of external appearance of organisms. And one thing is sure, that other civilization is going to be bug-eyed monsters. They're not going to look like us. Do we look like lobsters or like beetles? We do and we don't at some level. So they're not going to look like us. Second, they're going to want to eat us because it's in the nature of things to eat other things. But I'm making joke of it. Maybe they'll develop a moral sense, but they will have different ways of representing the same things that we represent. And I'm so interested in that. And there is no way that they will have a Shakespeare play, but they will have E equals MC squared. They'll have it. In some other format, they'll have it. So it's very interesting.
Dear Vida,
Hi.
I must rush off. I wanted to say thank you to my dear friend Roald. Thank you,
Yes.
Roald.
Yes.
I'm supposed to be in Southern California at this very moment.
Go-
Stuck in the
go
snow
get
in
there.
Ottawa. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Unless Shakespeare was one of them.
Yes. So what do you think, Victor, about how they will react to us? Cannot tell.
Dr. Hoffmann, I have a question. So as a chemist, how you would define what life is?
I don't have any particularly good definition, but I think that self-replicating, that there is a certain complexity that is going to be necessary, and I think of self-replicating organisms with a mechanism for storing information is part of the essence of life, but I just don't worry too much about it.
About the definition, you mean?
Yeah, about the definition. Is there something special to consciousness, or is consciousness going to evolve at a certain stage of evolution anywhere that we have it? And I somehow, here there comes a disagreement between people who are religious in an honest and essential sense and others. I think that consciousness and moral principles can evolve out of the normal evolutionary processes. I don't think we need a creation in the process. But we will see on some things when we encounter those civilizations. It'd be so interesting.
But should it be carbon-based?
Probably so, but I may be talking out of enough ignorance. I think it will not be silicon-based. Silicon's too different. I think it will be carbon-based. So one interesting piece of information that we have is, I don't want you to forget it, is we have visited with our tools the moon and Mars and examined the inorganic materials on those. And they do not differ in any way from what you find on Earth. In their abundance, in how they mix with each other, yes, but it's the same carbonates and silicates and inorganic materials that are there. What this does is to support the underlying chemistry under at least our planet forming conditions. And therefore, I think certainly that in our system, nothing else can be there. But I'm involved with a group at Cornell that is looking at the possibilities of information storing materials arising on the surface of Titan. So Titan is a moon of Jupiter, and or is it Saturn? I always have trouble, especially as I get older. But Titan has on its surface a pressure of 1.5 atmospheres. It has an atmosphere. It unfortunately has a temperature of -90 C. And it's yellowish. And on the surface, we have landed cameras on Titan, and there are seas on Titan filled with a liquid. That liquid is, that -90 C is in a region, there the similarity ends. All the features of seas and rivers are there, but the seas and rivers are made of methane and ethane, which are liquid at that temperature. That's very hard to put your mind around. But they are now planning to land a submarine on Titan to explore in these seas. They look to be, some of them, more than 100 meters deep, and they can, it's just incredible these things can be measured. But you've seen the Mars landers, you can see what we can put on there. Anyway, Titan has an atmosphere of methane and nitrogen, no oxygen. And so there are molecules of carbon and nitrogen and hydrogen that are forming, but no oxygen to speak of, apparently, in that atmosphere. And people are thinking about what kind of chemistries you can have on the surface.
May I ask you, people sometimes can identify the stones found on Earth as originated on Moon or on
Yes.
Mars. That means that they should be significantly different from surrounding materials. And you said that actually
Yeah,
very close.
They are same. There are differences. So I think what they can identify meteorites as coming from another place, yes. But they're still very similar to ours. But they can enough, they're different enough, they can tell them.
Хорошо.
I have a question.
Ну, говори.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Yeah, this is philosophical question, and your envision of our planet in 200-300 years from physical point, chemical point of view, and moral point of view, where humankind going to be, if it's appropriate question, of course.
I don't know. I don't have any. I don't have any knowledge. 200, 300 years is a long time. 200, 300 years ago, the fellows of the Royal Society in London and the fellows of the Académie Française could not imagine that an Asian or a Jew would know science. they could not imagine a Black or a woman being a member of that academy, okay? So if that's what 200, 300 years did on Earth, and we know how wrong they were about science and about every women and everything. So, but they weren't wrong about some things. So you can read Moliere's comedy and it still is funny and it still makes good sense of the power relationships between men and women, between husbands and wives. So some things haven't changed. I think the problem right now facing us of climate change is a perturbation which is potentially gigantic. And we know what it did in the past for no matter what the climate change is from, but what the climate change can do to our environment. The sea levels are going to rise a tremendous amount. One worries about what's going to happen. The continents in 200, 300 years are going to move inches to feet, but I think, but the seas are going to rise much, much more than that. And it's going to affect our climate. I think we can reverse this and we can also find ways to trap the carbon emissions, but we seem to lack the concerted willingness to, as a people, to do that. I'm not.
Sorry to interrupt you. So process of creation is still going on?
You can turn on your TV and turn to a live feed from Iceland of a volcano erupting, and you can have a feeling for part of the process of creation. Yes, lava is still coming up. And so creation is going on. Ideas are being created at a very rapid phase. Cultural evolution has surpassed biological evolution. That's part of our problem. We don't give the biological evolution a chance. Something like TikTok spreads much more rapidly than a new way to see a molecule. I don't want to be pessimistic about this. I'm a childhood survivor of the Holocaust, and I'm optimistic about human nature. It's true that my optimism was severely tested by 4 years of Trump, but I still remain optimistic that we'll come to something. I'm very worried also about abuses of artificial intelligence and our interaction with the computer, which has fundamentally changed things. And again, these things move so fast that we cannot yet know what will happen. I'm refusing to answer your question, really.
Appreciate very much.
Thank you very much. I read your biography. I'm a daughter of Holocaust survivors. Actually, it's also from Poland, but now it's Belarus. It used to be Poland. And
yes, I was born in 60 kilometers from Lvov, then little town that's now called Złoczów, then was Złoczów. And we left there in 1944 at the end, or we left Poland in beginning of 46. So I lived only there. I was born in 37, so.
Yeah. So you believe in destiny, or it happens random, or how it works in this world?
It's hard to imagine. There are so few who survived of us. But we are here in Canada and America
This is what all
from many countries, yeah.
from many places.
Yeah.
And it's so nice to see you all. Oops, my light just went out, but I'll put it on. Now it's on. It's very nice. I'm so happy you're doing this, bringing art and science, and also
this is my passion for many years.
Yes.
And many thanks to Victor. Victor, are you with us?
I'm here.
Yes, he's here.
I would ask couple of, like, maybe people ask couple of more questions, and then I will ask Victor, who actually made it, who introduced me to Roald, and
maybe Victor, you can read a poem.
Exactly, this is what I wanted to ask, and if you can read in both languages. But let's see if people have other questions, and then we will finish with the Victor reading.
If you allow me, I just came to this conversation lately, and I watched you actually on Facebook before interacting into Zoom, and I was amazed with your attitude to connect actually abstract art and chemistry, and I felt like it's a pity that I'm not chemist, because I'm not very good in abstract art, you know. And I'm very thankful for what did you do. Even on this portion, I listened to you maybe for half an hour, and it was pretty interesting, actually, comparisons which you did. And thank you for this. And actually, I still would ask you, like, philosophical question. Do you think that it's enough mathematical actual evidence in climate change, or it's more political thing?
I think there is actual evidence. There is definite evidence for climate change. We see the rise in temperatures. You just have to look at when the birds come to your feeder over your memory. Now, the second part of this, is this climate change anthropogenic? Have we caused it? And I think there is evidence for that as well. And I think there are disagreements. There are disagreements between scientists. So that's part of the story. There are strong deniers of the anthropogenic character of this, who are good scientists. I think the evidence, my daughter works in the field, and I think the evidence is pretty good. I recommend a book by my daughter. We're always in favor of what our children do, right? My daughter has written a textbook for high school teachers called, together with some other people, called A Teacher-Friendly Guide to Climate Change. So you can also tell from that I'm not going to be against climate change. I mean, I'm against it occurring, but my daughter has worked directly on it. I think the evidence is pretty good. It's not unanimous. It's not unanimous.
I know, that's why I'm asking, because I read probably 10 years ago, actually it's a fiction. It was like Michael Crichton, who wrote the book, The State of Fear. And it's fiction, but he actually, in bibliography, at the end of the book, it was more than 100 actually scientific articles which were actually against the anthropological reason.
But if there are so many, like we can only ask whatever Roald's opinion, and
No, I agree.
Just my opinion. I'm not an expert in the field.
I would like to add that during the past 3.5 billion years, environmental changes were driving force of the evolution of
Yeah,
Earth.
but like, sorry guys, this is the, yeah, understood. I can see some other question from Slava Greenspoon. Slava? I see you're like raising hand.
Слава и Анечка, вас зовут.
More. Can you hear me?
Yes, I guess we can.
Excellent. So now it worked. Professor, I'm not sure if you're interested in that field or knowledgeable in that field. And if yes, then we can have a very important, extremely important conversation. The field is novel weaponry. There are new weapons which are available to, let's say, bad actors around the world. Weapons which make the concept of assured mutual destruction, which basically keeps us alive since the Second World War, just that, a concept and not a reality. My question is, are you familiar with that? And what are your thoughts and thoughts of your colleagues on the subject of the novel weaponry?
First of all, I continue to be amazed by the rationality of the former Soviet Union, from which most of you suffered, that on this matter of mutual assured destruction, they more or less kept to the terms that were negotiated. And all of us also, maybe we owe it only to a few people, but it's absolutely amazing that the Soviet Union ended without bloodshed, without much bloodshed. That's not what anyone would have predicted 50 years ago. Okay, so I think mutual assured destruction was a very interesting idea which worked remarkably because the military people's interests somehow intersected with the rationality of the scientists they asked. Will it hold when the actors are even less rational than the people who ran the Soviet Union, or are motivated by forces which we do not know, of revenge or hatred or some other forces? And that I don't know. But I think you are talking about some other things other than the nuclear weapons. And I don't really know that much about the other threats, except that in some way, what we've seen in a pandemic is the ability to disrupt our life in a way which we could not have imagined 2 years ago, that we would be in such a state. The other force is that I think is very imaginable is a total collapse of the computer systems of the world. And that is envisioned in a lot of dystopic science fiction novels, but I think it's a possible reality. And there are some forces that could do so because the ingenuity of evil seems to have no bounds. And also, there is something about the hacker mentality that makes for a suspension of moral judgment when it applies to anything having to do with computers and information, so that the same criteria are not applied. What I'm trying to say is there are brilliant hackers who can bring down our systems around the world. And they don't seem to care in the same way about that. And yet that could cause, I mean, everything is controlled by computers. It could really cause a disaster. Are you thinking of those things like computers and viruses?
No.
No. Then I don't know.
There is a different player now on the international arena. It's called Russia. It is very, very different from Soviet Union. And it did develop novel weaponry based on 2 thermonuclear weapons. But the way it's packaged and the way it acts, it will require a very long time to imagine something which will make those weapons obsolete. And there is something else. There are people in charge who don't like us. We Jews know quite well that in that part of the world, Jews were disliked.
Slava, we won't get the...
No, I would like to hear more about it. Maybe
we can just...
Maybe you can write to me about
yeah, separately.
My email is very easy to find.
Could I ask you a question?
Yes, Vladimir.
How about total collapse of power grid?
Yes, that could be, but that it would not recover. We just had an interesting experiment, a partial collapse in Texas, but it recovered. But there could be more serious things.
But it was self-imposed in Texas,
right?
But it could be imposed by some unfriendly country.
Yes.
And not on Texas, but on the whole country.
Yes, could happen. Could happen. Oh, I was trying to tell you nice things about science, or at least not nice. I wasn't trying to tell you that science is not going to pollution, that it's not going to cause pollution or anything, but I wanted somehow to get it. The reason we are here is we believe that the human intellect has created something in art and science, and that we value it. We want it to come to our children and grandchildren. I wanted to communicate to you some of that about both art and science. And I chose to do it by picking, as someone said, something very unlikely, abstract chemistry. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, this is amazing, actually.
But if you look, you will find, I think it says that in the Bible somewhere. And there are points of similarity because in both creative, smart human beings have thought about things. And they have come up with absolutely amazing things. I want us to see those things. I don't want you to see my orbitals and my work. I want you to see the Taxol synthesis. It's beautiful.
Well, I think we have to think positive.
Okay.
We don't have to think negative.
Okay, let's have Victor.
If we think positive, then everything will be
positive.
No, but we don't. There are times to worry. But Victor, read us a poem.
Listen. Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's finish with action. Well, Victor, maybe you can say a couple of words about, because Roald seemed to be a very, very humble person, doesn't want to talk about himself. So then you can talk about Roald's poetry and your translation.
I was just incredibly lucky to find, quite by accident, I found about Dr. Hoffmann. Our research does not overlap, so we never crossed in professional plane. But what happened, I was back about 20 years ago, I was actively searching for people who hybridize science and art, especially science and literary art, poetry. That's one thing. We suddenly came together, and I discovered that I actually can be useful. I asked Roald if I can translate some of his poems into Russian. And I thought it is rather easy because everyone who knows Russian poetry knows about rhyme and meter, and Roald writes Verliber, free verse. And I thought this is easy, but this is not. Because once you are more or less liberated from traditional classical rhyme and meter, what is left has to be translated. And someone says that poetry is what is left after it has been translated, what is left out. Anyway, because most people who are here probably will understand Russian, I would like to read one of Roald's poems, which I translated into Russian. I'm not sure that I should read the original, but if
no, that's fine. I think that's fine, and I hope Roald wouldn't object. No, read
No,
the
I don't object.
Yes.
Would it be possible? Would it be possible if Roald reads it in English
Yes,
first?
I can also.
Yes.
I can read it.
How about maybe we read the Russian first?
Okay.
So Russians will know what it is about, and then then we can have the original, because it's all about creation. Roald has a lot of very esoteric poems with chemical and personal and biographical details which need some discussion, and this is wonderful. I'm grateful that we had over the years many of those discussions. I actually had to make the tables with lines and rows to follow those.
We had a lot of fun.
Yes, it was a lot of fun, and that's what is very, very valuable. But here is one of Roald's versions of creation. The poem actually is called версия. Когда Бог делал солнце, он лежал на белом песке, и, простирая бледные руки в пространство, сформировал он, Бог, шар водородный, зажег в нем ядерный огонь свой, и ощутил он тепло его на мягкой ладони своей, и это было хорошо, это было его солнце. Когда Бог потом решил сделать луну, оперся он ногами своими о ледяную шапку Марса, и, протянув снова руки свои, ухватил он кусок ранее сотворенного солнца, и запустил его Бог, как снежок, в землю свою. Земля пошатнулась и дала начало луне, Божьей луне, и он ощутил ее отраженный свет, и это было хорошо, и хороша была луна его. Когда же настало время Богу населить эту голубую землю, он погрузил ноги свои по колено в воды морей и озер своих, и, Боже милостивый, вовсе не стал он делать людей по образу и подобию своему, а просто протянул свои руки, теперь уже обожженные солнцем, и заронил зернышко риса, митохондрию, глаз осьминога, и он дал им опасность и шанс, и правила дал, и время Божие, и уже существа появились, заговорили, и этот разговор был хорош, разговор между ними и Богом.
Спасибо.
Now in
English. So
yeah, the original.
In English it's called rewrit, because what's being rewritten is the beginning of Genesis, and I tried to capture and what I don't know if came out is the way it is said in Russian versions of Breshit.
Bereshit в начале, at the beginning.
Yeah. Rewrit. When God made the sun, he lay back on his white sand beach, and reaching out with both pale hands into his space, he shaped there a sphere of hydrogen. God did, set it alight with his nuclear fire. God felt its warmth on his soft hand, and it was good. It was his son. When God set about next to make the moon, he put his feet on the ice cap of Mars and reached out again, seizing a piece of an old sun, and God threw it like a snowball at his earth. The earth rocked, and so the moon, God's moon, came to be. He felt it was good. He felt its reflecting light, and it was good, his moon. When time came for God to people this blue earth, he stood knee-deep in paddy and sea, and dear God, he didn't make people in his image, but just reached out his now sunburnt hands to plant a mitochondrion, here a squid's eye, a seed of rice. Hazard he gave them, rules, God's time, and soon enough the creatures came, spoke, it was good, the word between God and his people.
I think this is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Roald.
Poem, and thank you, Victor, for translation.
Yes,
And that was
Beautiful translation.
yeah,
yes,
that was
you
a great
did. It was a good
presentation.
translation.
And,
Thank you
and
all, and goodbye.
thank you very much. And come to see us if you want to connect with each other.
I will join now that I know you exist.
Yes, and I put in the chat our website, club.etcetera.ca. Who is interested, who is using Facebook, come to Facebook and just connect with us.
Okay, good to see you all.
Stay safe and be healthy. Bye.
Bye.
And happy Passover to everyone.
Thank you.